Okay, we're business. Okay. So this morning our topic is Negi'ah and touching on other subjects. Now, of course, the point was to play on words, but besides the play on words, there's also gives you the opportunity to ask any question you like at any point. So if you have any specific issues you want to raise after we get to the main body, I'm happy to address them. So the beginning with Negi'ah. So this is a topic which is a concern to teenagers from time immemorial. What exactly to do in relationship to the other gender when coming in encounter with them. And it's interesting thing is that Rabbi Soloveitchik was asked to address this point to a bunch of teenagers many years ago. I don't remember exactly the date. And it was fascinating to see what he wrote, because obviously there you have a person who's a great scholar, who's one of the Gedolei Hador, who has to address a bunch of NCSY-type teenagers, and what's he going to say? So several of you have heard bits and pieces of this from me already, but it's worthwhile focusing on it, of course, in greater detail. The Rav said a very interesting thing. He said that there's a famous philosopher of religion whose name is William James. William James was a famous secular philosopher of religion at Harvard, and he wrote that the purpose of religion is happiness. In other words, people are not happy in this world. What gives them happiness? The promise of a better world, the promise of a master plan, the promise of things to come which make it all worthwhile. That's what religion does for people. So he says, well, she doesn't say this, but obviously this leads into what Karl Marx said. Karl Marx is famous for having said, religion is the opiate of the masses. In other words, religion dulls the proletariat into not rebelling against the situation, because they promise that things will be better in the world to come. In the meantime, the higher classes subjugate the lower classes, and they use religion as their tool. So that's the flip side of religion being for happiness. Well, so Rabbi Soloveitchik said, and this is a classic Litvischer perspective, and of course Rabbi Soloveitchik was a quintessential Litvak, we couldn't care less if you're happy in Judaism or not. It makes absolutely no difference to us. As a matter of fact, we don't care if you're absolutely miserable. What we care about in Judaism is that heroism. In other words, Judaism is religion which is meant to make heroic people. Heroic people are made by a specific plan of action. And he says it's like an athlete. If you have an athlete, he has to have a very strict training regimen. He has to have a very strict diet, a very strict pattern of exercise in order to develop his capacity. Most of it is restraint. Most of it is to refrain from indulgences which are going to divert him from his purpose. And therefore, Chazal tell us, Ezu kibor hakovish is yitzro. What does it mean? It means that if you want to be heroic, you're going to have to give up some of the indulgences and luxuries of this life. If you want to be a famous athlete, if you want to be a great warrior, you're not going to be able to indulge yourself the same way you would if you were just an absolute hedonist, a pleasure-seeking person. And he says that's why Judaism has many more mitzvahs lo saseh than mitzvahs saseh. You know, most New Age religions nowadays are warm, fuzzy, good, feelings, spiritual. Judaism is not that spiritual religion when it comes down to it. We like spirituality on occasion, but it's much more about the lo sasehs than the asehs. It's much more about the negative commands than the positive commands. 365 lavin versus 248 mitzvah saseh. What that comes to tell us, Rabbi Soloveitchik, is that Judaism is more interested in the heroism than in the pleasure. And again, this is a very important point to make. Almost all other religions, unless you're a monk or a nun, there are very few restrictions on you. It's mostly about nice rituals and ceremonies and so on and so forth. There are certain people who separate themselves from the world, but for the most part, other religions are not pain like Judaism is. Judaism is a big, big pain. I'm going to digress a bit here. Both the Maharal and Rabbi also want to speak about the question, why is Shavuos, many people speak of the question, Shavuos is never mentioned in Torah as Matan Torah Seinu. It doesn't say in the Torah that the Torah is given on Shavuos. It says that Shavuos is Yom HaBikurim. So why does it never say that Shavuos is Matan Torah Seinu? So the way he puts it, it says, not only that, in Parshas Re'eh, when it talks about the Simcha of Shavuos, it says that it's a chok. You're supposed to keep these chukim. So this one of the chukim is Shavuos, specifically Shavuos. So the question, of course, Simchas Yom doesn't seem to be a chok. It seems to be something which is a mishpat. Makes sense. It's not one of those mitzvahs which at first don't make any sense. So he says, no. He says Shavuos should be a day of mourning, because Torah is difficult. It's painful. It's hard. So therefore, why should we be happy at Shavuos? Because at Shavuos we got all this danger of messing up and doing all sorts of averos and be going off the derech and having consequences as a result. So everybody says the Torah both again the Maral and the say the Torah concealed that Shavuos is Matan Torah saying, so maybe you'll have a chance to be happy on Shavuos. And the Torah concealed that it made it says Zman of Yom Yikurim and said it's a chok to try and distract us. And if we do remember that Matan Torah saying, to remember that nevertheless there's a chok that we should be happy on Shavuos. Now this is an extraordinary statement. We'll come back to perhaps a little bit later to how we reconcile that with the other perspective, which is one we always get in yeshiva, which is that Torah is great, it's wonderful, it should make us ecstatic and happy, and so on and so forth. They can be reconciled, not for now. We'll come back to it maybe. So again, getting back to Negi'ah. So the Torah says that we're going to make you heroes. In order to make you heroes, we have to deprive you of certain indulgences. And those indulgences include primarily things which are going to occupy your thoughts and distract you very much from what you're supposed to do. And that's why something like Arias is much more forbidden than kashrus. Because kashrus doesn't necessarily occupy your thoughts. It could. People might have tremendous taivas for steaks, and it might occupy their thoughts to a great extent. But when we say lo sosu achrei levavchem achrei nechem, not to follow our heart and our eyes, what we're primarily talking about is Arias, because Arias, thinking about women, is something which can completely capture a person, completely envelop a person, and completely focus a person in the wrong direction. It's interesting because the Rambam, when he talks about Avas Hashem and Hilchos Tshuva, he gives him this mashal. He says, Avas Hashem should be like love a person has for a woman. And just like when a person has love for a woman, it's all-encompassing, all-engaging. It occupies his thoughts and his heart 24 hours a day. So too the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says the Rambam, should be something which is all-encompassing, all-engaging, and constantly engaged, and constantly involve your heart in that pursuit. So the idea of desire and the idea of love, which are two separate things but are connected, are both the most powerful human emotions. In fact, Tzadok HaKohen says that kinah is not a Jewish emotion. Jealousy is not a Jewish emotion. Now, it's true, Jews are jealous, but that doesn't come into practice so often. In other words, jealousy is the root of the aver of ritzicha, of murder, and taiva, desire, is the root of the sin of arayas, of licentious behavior. So it says Jews are not murderers. They don't kill people. That's the meat of Esav. We don't kill people. Even today in the state of Israel, although there are murders which take place, they are relatively rare, relative to what takes place in general society, and even more rare still among people who are traditional. But certainly, the number, we know that blue-collar crime of that sort is not a Jewish type of thing. White-collar crime we like, but blue-collar crime is not us. On the other hand, taiva is something which is very Jewish. Jews have lots of desires, just like everybody else. And the Zohar says, it's a contradiction with the Gemara and Sukkah, but it's not. The Zohar says that the Yetzer Hara is never batel, even lost level. There's always the Yetzer Hara, because you have Yetzer Hara, lo yishachach hamidu d'oraisa. If not for there being Yetzer Hara, there wouldn't be a desire or lust for Torah either. So therefore the Yetzer Hara is important, essential, and never goes away. Now, what the Zohar says is that it's mislabing, it becomes bleached, meaning it can be used properly, but it's still there, it still exists. So therefore, coming back to our Yetzer Hara, which is the underlying issue of what is the topic of Negi'ah, the Yetzer Hara, Chazal says, Torah and Chazal, and as Rabbi Soloveitchik says, all of Judaism regard it as something which has to be tamed, has to be channeled, has to be restrained. Now, just like the power of an athlete, the power of an athlete is supposed to be channeled, it's supposed to be directed and developed. The Yetzer Hara is also something which, as he mentioned a few moments ago, is good. And, like the Rambam says, the Yetzer Hara of love is there to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. According to the Social Lanter, the Yetzer Tov is usually a euphemism for intellect, and the Yetzer Hara is a euphemism for emotion. And what the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara are supposed to do when we say the whole above, Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, it means you're supposed to use them together, use the Yetzer Tov to channel and direct the Yetzer Hara. But that means there have to be very strict parameters, which can contain this very powerful force called the Yetzer Hara. So one of the restrictions which the Torah gave us is Negi'ah. Not to touch, it's close in the category of lo sikru galos erva. Not to come close to an erva. Not to come close to a person who's forbidden. Not suffice even to a husband and wife. This is one of the more negative parts of Judaism, which when you get Balei Tshuva, you don't tell them at first because it might prevent them from becoming Balei Tshuva. Is that when you're married, half the month you can't touch your wife. Unless she's pregnant for her, because she's in Nida, which is usually at least 12 days a month. It really stinks, but that's what Judaism requires of you. It's not the rice, by the way. When the rabbi for it, the rabbi rice is only 7 days, but the rabbanan is 12 days. What? with yesterday, they added a day, because I'll say that they originally, because I'll made 11 days, they added made at least 12 days. Obviously, the women want to break from the men. That's part of the reason why this exists, but they're not in that is indicative of that point which you bring up of that vested interest which you have. But from a man's perspective, it really is, of course, in studying in Judaism, which is very hard to accept. And after when a woman gives birth, you can't touch her for several weeks. It's a very difficult thing. But nevertheless, that is perhaps the greatest sacrifice of a normal person that Judaism requires. And that is something which Judaism requires because it's meant to train a person to be a hero, to be heroic. Now that's with one's wife, when she's in Negi'ah. But there is, by the way, there's a chumrah which we observe, which again I shouldn't tell you about because, it's one of the sadder parts of Judaism. But is that when your wife is in Negi'ah, you're not even allowed to pass something to her directly. You have to put it down on the table, and she has to take it from the table, or some other way of doing it. There's a whole shaila whether you can throw your keys up in the air and have her catch it. Is that considered to be going directly from hand to hand? Or is that considered to be indirect? So this is, again, one of the more difficult things of Judaism. There are obviously good things about Judaism which compensate for that, but this is difficult. Now, that's when one's wife is a Negi'ah, that's after marriage. Before marriage, and even during marriage, of course, we have this prohibition concerning all women with whom one is not married. It applies to women even if they are not married to anybody else, because in our day and age, all women are nidos, because they don't go to the mikvah until they get married. It applies to a woman who is married because she is an HSC, she's off limits to you, and therefore you can't touch her. So this is a Torah prohibition, to come close to another woman who's not permitted to you, b'derech chiba, in a way which can be construed as affectionate. Now, be construed as affectionate, I would say, does not include a barber. Let's say you have a female barber. Some people don't go to a female barber. I think it's okay. I would go to a woman barber because there's no chiba involved in her touching your hair unless you're a very strange person. And there are similar situations which are well known. One of the great issues in Orthodoxy is whether a man can shake a woman's hand. Is that going to be derech chiba, not derech chiba? And according to the poskim, who our segment of Orthodoxy relies upon, which is not everybody, but for our purposes, the general rule of thumb is if a woman sticks out her hand to you and you can't avoid it in any other way, so then you just what? Dead fish. Yes. Yes. You can shake her hand back. Usually you'll be so comfortable that you certainly won't enjoy it. So that is the rule of thumb for our, again, chassid would never do that. People who are, there are certain people who would extend their hands, but our road is to respond, not to extend a hand to a woman. Now, it's important to stress that the idea, people very often make the mistake. When you give the shiur normally to teenagers, not you guys obviously, but most teenagers ask, just because I shake a woman's hand doesn't mean I'm going to have sexual relations with her. So therefore, what is the prohibition of just shaking a woman's hand? So in order to understand this, let's go back to a more basic issue, which is not codified so strenuously in halacha, but al-tarba sichei ma'isha. Says you're not supposed to speak very long, at great length to a woman. That's in Pirkei Avos. We do know in halacha, kol b'yisrael, you're not supposed to listen to a woman singing. Now, the heterim are not as extensive as some people would wish, but the most basic heter, which is good for a person like myself who has no idea what these women look like, is that if you don't know what a woman looks like, you're allowed to listen to her singing. That means on the radio or such like. Yes.
Is extended to if you don't know her personally?
No, not that I'm aware of. Not from the Tzitz Eliezer that I recall. Okay. There is the Tzitz Eliezer, which I think you're talking about, is one in which he discusses Sweetie H's heter. He doesn't like the Sweetie H. The Sweetie H has the famous heter of Trei Kali Lo Mishamoy. When two people are singing together, so then you're allowed to listen to a woman singing. So as long as you're singing with her, or she's singing with somebody else, so then you're allowed to sing with her. And see, the Sweetie H really did this, and he gave this heter and several other terms for mixed youth movements right up to the Second World War, which were, like NTSY, trying to save the Jews from assimilation and being lost to posterity. It's interesting that he brings down the Sweetie H story with Rabbi Yisrael Hildesheimer. Basil Hildesheimer was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Berlin Yeshiva, the Berlin Rabbinical Seminar. This is the main yeshiva in Germany. And Rabbi Yisrael, of course, is the leader of the Muslim movement. Rabbi Yisrael once came to visit Rabbi Basil Hildesheimer's house. At Rabbi Basil Hildesheimer's house on Shabbos, the women sang Zmiros. And when Rabbi Yisrael said, when he said, if he was in Lithuania and he was a Rav, they kick him out of his Rabbanus. And they would kick him out of his Rabbanus. It would be appropriate to kick him out of his Rabbanus for allowing women to sing. But he said, my chelek in Gan Eden should be together with Rabbi Zvi Hildesheimer. Because he obviously understood that Rabbi Zvi Hildesheimer was doing the Shem Shemayim in order that women shouldn't be lost to Judaism, and therefore he felt that participation was essential to his spirituality, and that's why he permitted it. So most poskim don't like what Rabbi Zvi Hildesheimer permitted, and most poskim reject that. But the Swedish H was actually employed after Rabbi Zvi Hildesheimer's death many years later as Rosh Yeshiva in the Berlin Seminary, and he tries to find leniencies in accordance with Rabbi Hildesheimer's perspective. Now, so getting back to the reasons for this, there's an important point to make, which is usually lost on when people get in conversations about Negi'ah, which is that it's not because Negi'ah will lead to something that Negi'ah is also. It's not because listening to women singing will lead to something that it's also. It's not because talking to women at length is going to lead to something that Chazal found on it. It's because anytime there's a relationship between a male and a female, there is an underlying current of sexual pleasure which may be present. Now, I'm not saying when you check on the grocery store and you have a woman cashier, you experience any type of sexual pleasure, unless you are very, very strange. But in a sustained interaction or a physical interaction with a woman, with a girl, there is that type of underlying sexual pleasure. And that's why there's a difference when a boy speaks to a girl than when a boy speaks to another boy. It's a different type of conversation. Conversation is a different level of significance, a different level of pleasure, because it's a different type of relationship. The relationship is underneath the surface of a sexual pleasure relationship. And that's why, again, Negi'ah, touching a woman, in and of itself can be exhilarating. In and of itself has this aspect to it. Regardless of whether it leads to anything or doesn't lead to anything, that's not the point. It's in and of itself an issue. The same thing is true about listening to women sing. Listening to women sing, it's not because it's going to lead you to commit any further averos. It's in and of itself an issue. Because listening to a woman sing is different for a man than listening to a man sing. When a man listens to a woman sing, there's this potential for this sexual pleasure, which might not always happen. Maybe doesn't most of the time happen. But certainly can happen because a woman's voice is like that. And I want to stress this is important. Obviously, we don't have the same prohibition vis-a-vis men. If a woman really gets aroused by chazanos, so she shouldn't listen to men singing either. But on the whole, we assume that women are not affected the same way men are affected. That's because, as we know, men are subhuman and women are human. And therefore, the halacha recognizes this and always puts more stringencies in terms of arayos on men than on women, because men are animals. This is a fact of life, which, unfortunately for us, is the nisayon which we were given, and we have to contend with, which is that we have much more powerful desires. And this is why in all the pop psychology books you always see in any relationship, the woman is interested in romance, and the man is interested in sex. That's the way it always is, because that's the way men are. Now, this leads us into a little bit of a tangent, but it's still on topic, which is, in most male-female teenage relationships, one of the many reasons we are afraid of and opposed to boyfriend-girlfriend relationships is because usually the male is exploiting the female. Even if doesn't seem that way, because the female generally, unless she has very low self-esteem, which is a different problem, is looking for a romantic relationship. And the man couldn't care less about the romance relationship. He is interested in the sexual pleasure aspect of the relationship. Again, even if he's not doing anything halachically forbidden, so to speak. Nevertheless, the relationship in and of itself, for him, gives him that pleasure. And gives something which he's looking for, not the romantic aspect. I had this discussion with somebody in my shiur. I've had discussion many times with many kids in my shiur. But I said, I'll give you proof that for your aspect it's not romantic. I said, you never write your girlfriend a poem. He said, of course not. It's never write a poem. It's not something somebody does. Right? A romantic poem, talking about. I said, that's an indication that your relationship with the girl is not a romantic relationship. So that is, in and of itself, the relationship has the issue of the sexual pleasure, and also it is an exploitative relationship because the male and female are not interested in the same thing. Now, I said before, a girl who has very low self-esteem might be interested in the sexual aspect because she can't validate herself with good grades in school. She can't validate herself with having a strong peer group, so therefore she validates herself by finding herself attractive in a man's eyes. But you don't want to go out with such a girl anyway, because the ones with low self-esteem are really not worth your time, and you're certainly exploiting them. So therefore, any type of relationship with a girl and as a teenager is dysfunctional. Now, so what is the difference between a relationship with a girl which is dysfunctional and a relationship of marriage which is functional? What's the hinge? And that's the difference between infatuation and love. What's the difference between infatuation and love? Infatuation is about me, love is about the other person. What that means is that a relationship between a male and female can be that both of them are looking for pleasure for themselves. I enjoy this being with this woman because I enjoy the way she looks, I enjoy the way she talks, I enjoy the way we interact. So in that case, I am taking from the relationship. I'm a taker, not a giver. As opposed to a loving relationship is one in which my focus is on giving the other person happiness, pleasure, satisfaction, enjoyment. That's love. The Hebrew word Abba, which means love, comes from the Aramaic word Hab, which means to give. So a relationship which is taking is infatuation. A relationship which is giving is a relationship which is loving. When teenagers enter a relationship, almost always, I think aren't 1 in 1,000 exceptions, but almost always it is a taking relationship. Each one is in a relationship to get something out of it, either validation or pleasure, not because they're sincerely interested in giving to the other person. Whereas marriage is about people giving to each other. It's a very different type of relationship with very different type of purpose. And to develop a marriage relationship, one has to be able to be mature enough to be able to focus on giving to somebody else, which as a young child, we don't do. It takes a long time to mature into this emotional state where I feel that I am built sufficiently self-confident that I can then reach out to other people and give to other people. As many of you know, this always tell the Talmudim is that they have no friends. Who doesn't know about this? Has anybody not heard about this from me?
I might have told some people.
Oh, okay. So generally speaking, teenagers have no friends. Right? You have acquaintances, you have companions, you have buddies, you have no friends. And this is according to the Rambam. The Rambam says that, in the name of Aristotle, there are 3 levels of friendship. There are really 4, but I'm going to oversimplify. 3 is what goes 1 that divides into 2. It says the lowest level of friendship is mutual benefit, meaning that they are business partners, or even according to the Rambam, a male-female relationship, which is an infatuation relationship. People derive pleasure from each other, benefit from each other, either in some sort of monetary way or in some sort of emotional way, but they are feeding off each other. That's the lowest form of friendship. The second form of friendship is when 2 people, and that every teenager has. If you play basketball with somebody, then he can be your friend on level 1. You enjoy being together on a basketball team. The second level of friendship, is the higher level of friendship, is where 2 people are comfortable enough to share secrets with each other and to disclose their vulnerabilities. In other words, I will disclose to you what my vulnerabilities and weaknesses are, what I need to work on, and you expose to me yours. That is the second level of friendship. This is already something which is very rare among teenagers. Most teenagers are uncomfortable. They're not confident enough. Even most adults are not confident enough to disclose their shortcomings and vulnerabilities to somebody else. They don't feel comfortable letting down their hair, so to speak, with anybody. But some teenagers have second level friendships. Rare, but it happens sometimes. Third level friendships are where 2 people, according to Rambam, are united together in a common transcendent purpose, meaning a purpose which is a growthful one, to bring a person to a higher level of functioning, intellectual, spiritual, emotional, and to focused on assisting each other in accomplishing that goal, in going towards that purpose. This is something which no teenager has. Maybe 1 in a million. So that type of friend we don't have, and that type of friend is very rare in life in general. Ideally speaking, your spouse is going to be like that, but also not always. So therefore, you have this concept of friendship on the third level, which almost no teenager has. Yeah. This is level 1. And now the truth is, in learning, it's sometimes harder to find a chavrusa than a wife. Because I can learn with my wife, because she's brilliant, smarter than I am, but her derech learning is very different than my derech learning. And we can never be compatible learning with chavrusa. We tried a couple of times. It doesn't work. But so chavrusa is sometimes harder to find than spouses. But on the flip side, though, a chavrusa it's a marriage of convenience, for the time you're learning together. It does not necessarily a friendship. You know, this, there's a famous story about two people meet each other in the inn, and they say, "You look familiar to me." The other guy says, "Look familiar to me." And the conversation turns out, for 7 years they sat on the same bench in Volozhin, and they never said hello to each other. So that's the classic Litvisher relationship. Except I would add that even more classic relationship is two chavrusas don't know each other's name, because they're there to learn together. There's no emotional bond.
Then shouldn't it be more? Shouldn't that make it that it's the third relationship? Because there is a transcendent purpose.
Yes, but it's not a committed purpose. In other words, it's only for the time that they're together. It's not a sincere interest in the other person's growth. It's actually just what we can accomplish together that amount of time. A Musar Chavrusa, if they're in the Varduk, that's where Musar was really Musar, that's what friendships were about. They would have discuss with each other, how to grow together, right? How their shortcomings, their weaknesses, they would divulge them deliberately, even in groups together, and then they work on them together, and that was true friendship. But they have there are no Bali Musar left today. It's like it's vanished, it's extinct. But theoretically, yes, the Musar relationship would be like that. So the what? Alcohol Anonymous. Yeah, but they're the only ones with two bands. Right, but their anonymity. In other words, I'm not sure. I don't think outside the group they have interactions with each other.
No,
They don't. So that in and of itself limits the concept of friendship. In other words, again, yes, there's a certain amount of time which is sincere emoting together, but it's limited. It's not always. It's not complete. So this idea of friendship, friendship is very much notion of ava, of love, where one is focused giving to each other. But that's right. So when a young couple comes to him, this is what he tells them: as long as you're focused on giving to each other, your marriage is okay. The moment you start focusing what each one of you take from each other, that puts the marriage in jeopardy. Now, I want to make this clear that as good as a husband might be, he still resents being the one who has to take out garbage. When I take out the garbage, I don't view it as an act of love and giving to my wife. I view it as a pain and a hassle, and I'm annoyed that she never takes out the garbage. But I'm not perfect, and most people are not perfect, so I'm far from perfect. But overall, the framework of the marriage has to be a framework of giving, even if it's not completely that way. Now, this brings me to another interesting point, which is, there's a famous story they tell about both about Shem Tov and the Negi'ah, and it can't be true about either one. And almost all of you have heard the story, in some version or another, which is, there's one Esrog in town. It's owned by a great Gvir. How many people know the story already? See? What? Yes. So they come to, the Negi'ah / Baal Shem Tov sends a message to the Gvir and asks for the Esrog. So the Gvir says, I'm only going to give you the Esrog if you give me all of your Olam Haba as the price. And the Negi'ah / Baal Shem Tov says he rejoices at the opportunity because give up all of their Olam Haba, because then they could serve Hashem Shema. So they enter into the deal. And then afterwards the Baskol comes out from Shemayim and says, because you gave up all of your Olam Haba, you get it all back. Now this story is hogwash on several levels. But first of all, you can't divest yourself of your Olam Haba. You can't sell it, give it, barter it to anybody else. It doesn't work. But even leaving that alone, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in order to give to us. To deprive HaKadosh Baruch Hu of the capacity to give to you is doing something which is distressful, so to speak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It would be inappropriate to not allow Hashem to reward you for what you did right. And therefore, it would be antithetical to the entire purpose. A person's not supposed to serve Hashem to get on Haba. A person's supposed to serve Hashem to keep Hashem and Nachas Ruach, to become a good person, to become Selem Elokim. But a person's supposed to allow HaKadosh Baruch Hu then to reward him. It's kind of like the analogy is, if you do something for somebody good, and you don't allow them to thank you, then you undermine the thing which you did good. Because thanking somebody is an essential of something which a person wants to do in order to reciprocate. And if you don't accept their thanks, then you're depriving them of something which they wanted to give to you. So again, the idea of giving is the basic idea of marriage. The idea of giving is the basic idea of love. Most relationships between male and female are taking, because you enjoy the pleasure of being with a beautiful woman, of being with any woman. And many different people enjoy all women of different kinds. Of interacting with this woman and into having this type of whatever it is, talking, touching, any kind of relationship. Okay? Now, as a result, I don't want to speak about my next topic. Okay. Yeah.
Would it be better to, like, wrong to deprive someone of, like, the ability to think even? Why is that it's better to discuss anonymously?
because they're afraid that the person is going to be shamed, and their embarrassment of you, and their embarrassment will outweigh their need to be grateful. It's always a balancing act to find the proper correlation between the two. There are two conflicting things, and the resolution is better to keep it secret.
Why are we not embarrassed before we do something? Because we can't give back?
Because we're stupid Americans. So matanas yichya, right? Shlomo Bell said we're supposed to hate gifts, right? We don't. In fact, we don't hate gifts because we're conditioned in our society from early age to enjoy getting something for nothing. But Chazal say, go down, enemy, gia kapo yosem shamayim. Whatever it means. It means that your natural inclination is, before you start getting birthday presents at a young age, is that you want to earn what you get. It shouldn't be nama de kisufa. It should be something which you get out of embarrassment and just for nothing. So therefore, actually, are getting gifts and liking getting gifts is not a good midah. It's a very bad midah.
How should we feel?
What?
How should we feel?
We should feel that that person has done something nice to us. It's unfortunate that we have to get it as a gift. It would make us. We should use it the way that person intended us, to give him pleasure. That's the way you should look at it.
What about like
Wedding presents. Wedding presents are something where, again, you it's ideally you would not have to take presents. Once you take a present, so then you better make sure to have a good marriage, because otherwise the whole purpose of the wedding present is undermined. Certainly, something which most people don't do properly, including myself, is, although I can only blame my wife for this, is that we didn't. You're supposed to always write thank you notes. I don't think we ever did write all our thank you notes. So, that's the reciprocity. Torah is a way also of giving back to people who gave to you. Which leads us to our next topic, which is the topic of why Judaism frowns on masturbation. Now, this is an idea which is not usually discussed in yeshiva, because we're uncomfortable discussing it. Yeah. Arousing oneself, right? I hope that was a serious question.
Yeah, you did a weird.
Good. Okay. So the arousing oneself sexually, self-arousal. So the question is, why Judaism is so anti-self-arousal? Why is that an issue? And it's something which is a very, very it's much more talked about Hasidic yeshivas. Hasidus is much more focused on avoiding the self-arousal and self-pleasure. But in Litvish yeshivas of all types, we don't talk about it for many different reasons. Among them, that we're big prudes. But besides that also we assume, the Gra says that learning Torah atones for all these things. Although I'm not sure we learn Torah to atone for everything that goes on. But the idea, so we should have to understand, based on what we've spoken about till now, that the drive which a person has for sexuality was given to a person in order to be able to create the most powerful giving relationship which exists, which is a relationship between two spouses. And that type of relationship between two spouses, so then there is this intensity of giving which comes from this tremendously intense human energy, tremendously intense human trait, which is the sexual drive, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. It's meant to give to others. That's why it was created. To use it for one's own purposes, to pleasure oneself, is antithetical to everything the Torah tells us. And it's taking the greatest pleasure, which is supposed to be the source of connecting to somebody else in a giving way, and using it for one's own pleasure, which is the exact opposite of what it's intended for. Now, on a different level, much more different level, but something which is analogous. People don't go to restaurants alone. And people don't go to movies alone. Television, one of the great obelisks of television, one of the great tragedies of television, and certainly of computers, is that television made it possible to watch something oneself. People used to be in the early days of television, if you look at the pictures, all the family gathered in one room, they used to watch together, there was one set, but then somehow the television industry got people to buy televisions for their own selves, their own rooms, their own places. And that's the way the entire social concept of watching television. That's one of the great tragedies of television. Computers, personal computers, took it even further. But once upon a time, that would have been looked at as very strange behavior. And still today, people usually, normal people, don't go to movies by themselves. Normal people don't go to fancy restaurants by themselves. Why? Because humans are designed to enjoy, to a greater extent, a shared experience than a solo experience. Because Baruch Hu embedded in human nature. If you go to a movie by yourself, you don't enjoy it as much. If you go to a restaurant by yourself, you don't enjoy it as much. So when a person does something with somebody else, even though it doesn't seem to make any sense at first glance, but you're enjoying the steak. What difference does it make? Do you enjoy the steak by yourself or enjoy the steak with somebody else? No, human beings enjoy some of the things more when they're in the company of other people. Does everybody see that? Does everybody experience that? Right? So, when you go to a pizza store and you see somebody eating pizza by yourself, you always feel bad for them. Right? Because, it's so sad. So sad. So the idea is that people are meant to enjoy things together. And most of the enjoyments of this world are given to cement relationships between people. And again, the higher, the greater the pleasure, the more its purpose is to enjoy together with other people. So therefore, anything which has to do with self-pleasure and self-arousal in Judaism is considered to be antithetical to the entire spirit of Judaism. And anything where a person does arouse himself is therefore considered to be a great misdeed. In Chassidus, it's considered to be, not by us, Chassidus, it's going to be worse than murder. To have
I heard once from a crazy person who violates all three Iyars.
all three of them.
Yeah, I don't know how to do
But you have to figure it. I guess that would start because when it's serving oneself, and Gilead rice, obviously, and she was diving also. Yeah, so okay, you got all three. Okay, that was easy. So so we, Misnagim, we don't have this option that this is the worst Avera possible of all Averas, but it is, and it's not even one of the live in the Moshe Feinstein was once asked a question about somebody who was a serial Mosi Zerel of Atola, how he does tshuva. And Moshe Feinstein actually gave a way for him to do tshuva. It's an English Moshe. But the point was that Moshe Feinstein said it's not an explicit Avera in the Torah, even though in Kabbalah it's a horrible, horrible crime. It's not one of the 365 mitzvahs los say. So therefore, no, it's not. Okay? So therefore, it's hard to know how exactly to prescribe tshuva for something which is not technically an Avera, but according to Kabbalah is the worst thing one could possibly do. That's why in Halacha there's this tension as to what exactly one does in these situations. But again, that's the idea, is that self-pleasure is a bad thing for humans to enjoy. Self-pleasure is the opposite of what Kosh Baruch Hu wants us to enjoy. Kosh Baruch Hu gave us pleasures to cement relationships. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin says, "Gedola l'gima shemakareses alabos." Eating together, even a small bite, a little drink, is great because it brings hearts together. That's the idea. Legima is given. Eat and to drink is given in order to bring people together. Any pleasure is meant to bring people together. Certainly, so much more so, sexual pleasure. Now, as a result, when we talk about what the Torah allows us and what the Torah forbids us, again, getting back to Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Torah disallows more than it allows. Judaism has ways of having fun, but they're limited. And I have to always tell people, one of the things which makes me a wicked person, I am a wicked, evil person, is that one of the greatest sources of fun for me, I don't think I told anybody here this, one of my greatest sources of fun and exhilaration, I did so, fascinating. What? Okay, fascinating. Okay, so I said right. So that's that my thrill of Schadenfreude. It's called. Right, Schadenfreude is a word which doesn't have an English translation. It means when I have thrilled at somebody else's downfall. Right. I have a very strong sense of Schadenfreude, and this is not a good trait to have. This is a trait which one can cultivate within Judaism. But it's not the Jewish trait to cultivate. So Judaism does not like us having fun in ways which work badly on our midos. And I'll tell you the Gra. The Gra is a fascinating Gra in Mishlei. It's a very important Gra. The Gra says, there's a passage which says, "Hachzek l'musar al toref." Hold out musar, don't lose your grip. So the Gra says that Kimash Adam Chai, which is alive, I think he uses a different language or press. Kimash Adam Chai, who lishbor hamid shlo shavar adato. The tzarich is chazek. Kim lo lama lo chaim. The Gra says the reason why you're alive, still alive, is to break the negative trait which you have and you have broken. And you have to be very strong with this. Because if not, your life is worthless. Why bother living? So the Gra saying is a fascinating of the Gra, you would expect he would say that the purpose of life is learning. No, he doesn't say that. The Gra says the purpose of life is Musa. The purpose of life is breaking one's negative character traits. All the Torah is really given to change one's character. I have on Facebook. I have right now a dialogue with a person who's a heretic. He's a childhood friend of mine. We know each other for 40 years, and his basic premise is that religion causes more crime and problems, and religious people are the source of all bad things in the world. Which, of course, is not true for many different reasons, but there is a school of thought called the New Atheism, opposed to the old atheism, which is an aggressive, arrogant atheism, which is out to eradicate religion and presents religion as the root of all evils. In other words, for example, his claim that religion is one of the great causes of murder and extermination in the world, because many people kill in the name of religion. ISIS, right? Right, yes, I'm Malik. So it's important before we get to Mchias Malik for a moment. It's important to understand that religion doesn't cause people to be violent. Religion is an outlet for people who are violent to express themselves. And this comes to a very important point made by Rav Wolbe, the Shiur. Yeah, Rav Wolbe says that one of the greatest Yetzer Haras which we have is the Yetzer Hara of frumkeit.
Oh, yeah, being too
Frumkeit, being too overly frum. Says, why is that? Because frumkeit means, for his way he defines it, religious fervor. A person does things not because they know it to be true, or because they decided it's what they should do, or because they made a rational or even calm decision, but rather they get caught up in a certain fervor, a certain great spirit, and they start doing things as a result. And it's nothing to do with God. It's an inner human drive to express religious fervor. Americans express religious fervor in sports. Europeans express it in a greater degree. They're willing to kill each other in soccer stadiums because of their great fervor for sports. The other forms of religious fervor which we possess and the way we express ourselves, and even in Judaism, which has nothing to do actually with Judaism, says frumkeit is religious fervor. For saying religious fervor, it gives a person a thrill, an inner thrill, to be a harsh, judgmental, nasty, violent, and outgoing person who goes out and does things, and the name of religion makes it. It's convenient to do the name of religion. You do the name of the Yankees, but it doesn't have the same geschmack, right? You do it for anything, but it's not the same level of fulfilling the drive. But that really the reason why people do violent things is because people have violent drives. People do religiously fervent things because people have religiously fervent drives. What religion is supposed to do, actually, any religion, not just Judaism, is channel those in productive ways. It happens to be that Islam is considered to be productive to use that to kill other people, which is unfortunate. In Judaism, it's not considered to be productive to kill other people. That religious fervor was supposed to be directed to what? Yeah, what specific aspect? No. What? What'd you say? No. You all know this. You're just not thinking. Korbanos. Right? That was the idea of korbanos, to express that religious fervor in a way, channeling it in a way which was dramatic, violent, exciting, but wasn't relatively innocuous. It was not going to, afterwards you eat. What? Mila. Mila's too quick. I don't think you get that thrill from Mila. No, Mechias Amalek is not like that. But now we'll come to Amalek. So Mechias Amalek is important to understand. People make a mistake, and they think that whenever people oppose the Amalek question, so it's based on a premise which is incorrect. It's going to the Rambam. Some people say Rashi argues. To me, it's not clear Rashi argues. The premise on which it is based is that if you meet a Amalekite in the street, you kill him. In other words, anytime you can identify somebody as Amalek, you kill them. And there's this tradition, which is Sheker V'Chosav, of course, in the name of that Reb Chaim Volozhner, once met somebody who was an Amalekite, took him to a room and strangled him. Who's heard that tradition?
I never.
Never heard that one? Okay. So according to the Musar, which I don't believe, Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonfeld, who was one of the great Rabbanim of Yerushalayim, when the Kaiser came to visit Yerushalayim, who here has been to Yerushalayim? So by Shari Yaakov, there's a gap in the wall, right? There's a road which goes through next to the gate. That gap was made in, I forget, 1903. What? For the Kaiser, right. So the Kaiser could come into Yerushalayim with his procession. So everybody came to meet the Kaiser except for all the notables of the city, except for the Chaim Sonnenfeld told the story, because according to the story, this Chaim Sonnenfeld has him what the facial features are of an Amalekite, and they identified the Kaiser as an Amalekite, and therefore they're not going to greet him. Which I think it's of course a bunch of baloney, because as we all know, all the royal families of Europe are all intermarried back and forth, and the Kaiser was more British than he was German, and if that was the case, then Queen Elizabeth was also from Amalek. So so getting back to Amalek itself, to kill an Amalekite on the street is forbidden. You're not allowed to walk over to anybody on the street, Jewish or not Jewish, and kill them. It's forbidden. Whether it's a capital crime or not a capital crime, it's not relevant. You can't do it. Okay? Including Amalekites. You can't even wage war against Amalek until you offer them peace first. Rambam says when you go to wage war against Amalek, you have to offer them peace, what does the peace consist of? That they should be subordinate to you, pay taxes to you, and keep Shabbat B'nai Noach. If they accept those terms, you don't kill them. The only time you kill Amalek is if they don't make peace, they refuse to accept your peace offer, and they go to war against you. So then, when you go to war against any other nation, you don't kill the women and children. When you go to war against Amalek, you also kill women and children. So this is a very special, narrow circumstance when you kill Amalek, and it's only if they won't accept Shem B'nai Noach, and it's only in the course of war. Same thing for Canaan. What? No. Because nobody else passing halacha on this. There might be other mefarshim who seem to indicate otherwise, but the Rambam is the only poster who actually wrote Psak on this. So therefore, you can't. There's nobody who actually argues in the Rambam explicitly. Yeah.
So, but to make this, that's not making peace with them. That's saying, basically, if you want to be our serfs, if they don't want to be your serfs, you kill them.
Well, the question is how non-Jews are supposed to relate to all non-Jews, right? So, generally speaking, in all non-Jews, we're supposed to convince them to keep Shem B'nai Noach.
Why the taxes?
Well, we assume that the war of the Rambam is talking about is a war where, in the old days, the reason why people went to war, even today, was in order to gain territory and in order to make more taxes. What? Same thing, right? So therefore, you don't have to impose a tax. You're foolish. The old days, certainly you were foolish if you did it, because that's why you went to war. But the idea is that if we did impose a tax, I have to accept the tax. Absolutely, it's Jewish. Yes. Okay. So now.
So the tax is optional, but if you just feel like making a lot of money, you tax them.
War is a financial venture. The Gemara Bracha says that when the people came to David Melch and said we have to make the treasury is empty, we have to go to war in order to make money.
You have those too.
Not really.
Yeah. So all war at some levels, I shouldn't say all war. Most wars at some level are financial.
How do you kill people for money? Isn't that like?
What else do you kill people for?
How do you kill somebody just for the money?
Everybody kills for money. What is all killing for? What?
I'm not supposed to kill.
We're not. That's why the Tzib has especially says that you need a special heter for warfare. Because warfare, otherwise warfare would also be low sirtzach, right? So, shofek dam adam, shofek dam adam, adam dama yishafek. So Tzib says only shvichas damim is also only one-on-one murder, not war. Now, of course, war is generally bad, but I want to make this clear as a devil's advocate from another perspective. Not mine necessarily, but just to make sure. Most heroism recorded in history is recorded in the course of warfare. There were people like Albert Schweitzer, who were great, Mother Teresa, who were great heroes beyond the battlefield. But most heroes which history gives us are in the battlefield, and even the nurses, Florence Nightingale, Clara Barton, are the battlefield nurses. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu obviously gave war to human beings obviously, we don't understand why it should be this way, perhaps, but for human beings to accomplish heroism, going back to where we began. So wars became an important condition in humanity in order to accomplish heroism in the fight of good against evil. This has certain negative ramifications, which is sometimes evil times over good.
Or the ones who don't have money to want to do it.
Right, or the rich people hire the poor people to go to work for them, as happened in the Civil War and other times. But the idea of war is given in order to give people a chance, men and some women, a chance to accomplish nobility, heroism, and immortalize themselves. It wasn't supposed to be that way if Gan Eden would have remained Gan Eden, but in this world that became the idea of war. Now, getting back to Amalek, though, because I haven't finished Amalek. Why is there a difference between Amalek and all other nations? And when Amalek doesn't make peace, you have to kill all of them. I can't answer that question completely. It bothers me too. But this much I can tell you, which is that the idea is evidently that Amalek represents such evil that if you can't get them to change for the better, which is what you're supposed to try and do, then you have to eliminate them. So I don't. Reb Noach Weinberg says, although this is an extreme way of putting it, he says, if you knew that the mother was carrying in her womb the fetus which would become Hitler, wouldn't you kill the mother and the child? So he says, Amalek is that. The children who grow up in Amalek are going to be those people who are evil. Now, I want to make something clear, another thing clear about Amalek. And this is something which I think is 100% true, which is there has been Amalek in thousands and thousands of years. That means, again, contrary to all the stories that are not true. So that means that this is one of the many parts of Torah for us, which are drosh v'kabel schar. They're not meant for us to practice, and they haven't been meant for us to practice in thousands of years. Just like Iyar Dachas, never happened. Supposed to learn from it. So to Amalek is primarily meant for us to learn. It's meant for us to learn that if we can't change evil, we have to eradicate it. It's not meant to teach us what we should go out and do. And Rabbi From Kaplan says that's why we read the Parsha of Amalek specifically on Shabbos. Because on Shabbos can't go out and wage the war anyway. In order to teach us that it's not something which we are expected to act upon literally, but something we're supposed to learn from and use in a way which is relevant to us. Most of the Torah is like that. Most of the Torah Shebiksav is like that. Torah Shebiksav is meant to be mitigated by Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is why, although you find many death penalties in Torah, death penalty was almost never imposed. Why is that? Because Torah Shebiksav is meant to teach us the ideal, and the ideal is far from the real, and it's not meant to be the real. Ideally speaking, if you do this, you should be put to death by Beis Din. But Beis Din in practice is not going to put you to death, and for that matter, for most of history, we haven't had Bati Din which could put people to death. So most of Torah becomes Drosh V'Kabel Schar. Torah Shebiksav. It's interesting that Torah Shebiksav almost spends much more time on mitzvahs which are not relevant than mitzvahs which are relevant. The class example being Tumah Tara versus Shabbos. Right? Shabbos is relevant at all times, in all places, to everybody, and yet the halachas of Shabbos are not mentioned in Torah. Tumah Tara hasn't been relevant for thousands of years. Even at a time when the Beis Din existed, it was not really relevant outside Yerushalayim for most people. Yet the Torah dwells on it in inordinate amounts of time. Because the Torah knows that things which are going to be practiced constantly don't have to be taught by itself. It's teaching things which are rare in order to teach the values of the Torah, that we should forget that these are the values besides the practices which we practice. So Amalek is teaching us this idea of what we're supposed to do when we confront evil. But it's not telling us what to do in terms of a daily practice of killing people. There's no such thing. And even, for understand Jewish history, we are told, Kodesh Baruch Hu obviously has a sense of humor. It's clear. That's, there's a Gemara which says that because 3 hours there, Kodesh Baruch Hu is Mesachikim Livyosim. Right? He plays with the Livyosim. So, whatever that means, it means that the world is supposed to be a fun place. So Kodesh Baruch Hu's sense of humor is manifest in many ways, but one of them is that there is a strong command, as we mentioned before, to destroy all the Canaanites upon entering Eretz Yisrael. Right? If you read Sefer Shoftim, you see almost no Canaanites were killed. Many Shvatim were a minority among the Canaanites amongst whom they lived. The Canaanim remained the majority. Throughout the throughout the period of Shoftim, there constantly fights against the Canaanim. So what that means is that even from the beginning, from entering Eretz Yisrael, a lot of this was considered to be more drosh v'kabel schar than was considered to be a practice. And certainly that at that time was the most likely time for this to be practiced, yet it wasn't practiced. So therefore, you see, first of all, Yisrael machmani by Shani Begoyim Lechasadim. Jews are not killers, so therefore it's hard for us to fulfill this law. And besides that, a lot of this law we regard as teaching us values as opposed to actually being something which we put in practice. I just said it's kind of dangerous, but I think it's true. Now, this led me to another point. Oh, yes. Another point in this regard, which is also dangerous, but this I might be going with Tzadok HaKohen. The Tzadok HaKohen says, the Medrash Shiur, it says, Yosef tzadikim hamidali b'churbana Yosef mibinyana. And, you know, the Talmud Bavli is getting Talmud Yerushalmi. What tzadikim have come out of the time of the Golus and the time when Am Yisrael lived in Eretz Yisrael. More Kiddush Hashem, more learning, more the Talmud of Bavli versus Yerushalmi. It's from Golus. So it says, Tzadok, Tzadok says, we don't understand this necessarily. But Golus has been more productive for the Jews than being in Eretz Yisrael. And there has been more, obviously, Am Yisrael spent most of its history in Golus. So therefore, even living in Eretz Yisrael, even having the Beis HaMikdash, is almost like a Drosh V'Kabel Schar type of thing. It's a Drosh V'Kabel Schar type of thing. It's to for us to understand what we're striving for, what we lost and what we're hoping to gain. So peacefully Yeshua, but that's not where Am Yisrael functioned for most of its history. So therefore, we use those things as ideals and as values in order to understand how to lead our life. Now, something asked me before to speak about Har Bayis Lewis, which is doesn't tie directly, but it does tie indirectly. Among the issues which we confront when we deal with women's issues, it's lately, of course, that you have phenomena like girls putting on tefillin and SAR and other types of supporting people support this, people don't support it, and generally speaking, there's a question as to why we don't treat women the same way as men in terms of education, in terms of mitzvahs, in terms of everything else. And this is back what we said before, that men are animals and require more restrictions and more mitzvahs than women. But it's more than that. There's more to it than that. There is, Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked by Delaware in Boston, about all sorts of feminist practices, things which women were clamoring for. I forget what the exact things were, but perhaps women's prayer groups, I don't remember what they were, back in the 70s already. It was then both called feminism, it was called women's liberation, and what's permitted and what's not permitted. And Rav Moshe has a tshuva, which he discusses in some detail. And then Rav Moshe says, at one point he says, L'maisa, whether something is mutter or usher, I'm paraphrasing of course, but it says mutter or usher is almost besides the point. The question is a question of motivations. Why they want to do this? If they want to do this because they want to accomplish higher avodas Hashem, greater avodas Hashem, that's one thing. But if they're doing it because they want to be just like the men, that's absolutely forbidden. The same thing. If it was done by sincere motives of avodas Hashem, it could be okay, but if the motivation is not avodas Hashem, then it's not okay. And many acts in this world are like that. It's really the motivation which determines the nature of the act. Some of you have heard this from me before, of the mashal, the professor of the two bakers. They both bake the same bread, charge the same price, it gives the same nutrition, and is tasty to the same extent. But one, it's an act of mitzvah, which gets him olam haba. The other, it is totally nothing. What's the difference? The first baker bakes the best bread he can bake, so the consumer will have the best experience possible. And in order to do that, he has overhead, he has to charge, he has to make a profit for himself, and so on and so forth. So he sells the bread at a high price. The other baker is trying to make the most money they can make. And therefore they bake the best bread because they know the consumer will pay the highest price for it. The markup is greater. So the same action, depending on who performs it, has very different parameters, very different character to it. One becomes a mitzvah, one is not a mitzvah. Sorry?
What's the mitzvah of giving people the right?
Yeah. Ki amarti olam chesed yiboneh. Anything can be a chesed, even make money for it. Okay? So so motivation is critical. Motivation is very important. And people have to figure out the motivations of people, which is the opposite of the American mentality. The American mentality is not to be judgmental. In other words, you always take things at face value, and you never judge other people. Ever. So the point that's quite possible. that for individuals, that's true. You should be done a personal kaschus. But a gadol hador, or a leader of any sort, has to try and determine motivations in order to understand where to lead his followers, in which direction, where the thing they're trying to institute or the thing they're trying to change is motivated by good motivation, motivated by bad motivation. Is motivated by something which is Avodas Hashem, or motivated by something which is not Avodas Hashem. So it says Rav Feinstein, many things which feminists do are not motivated by Yiras Shamayim and Ahavas Torah, but are motivated by the drive for equality. And that is awesome. Again, the same act somebody else might do for Avodas Hashem and Yiras Shamayim, but the motivation makes it no good. Makes it, I'm an afrikaner, makes it in order to change things in a way which is undermining the Masorah as opposed to constructive to the Masorah. Generally speaking, there's a rule of thumb, Moshe doesn't write this, but this is which I will tell you. It's usually that the women who don't dress with the greatest tznius are the ones who go and put on tefillin and want to learn Gemara and so on and so forth. It was the women who first went and dressed like a very prim and proper Beis Yaakov girls, and then they wanted to learn Gemara, put on tefillin. We can maybe see the contend that it's a form of achieving higher Avodas Hashem. But in reality, it's almost never like that. And therefore, the motives have to be questioned. The same thing applies to people going up in Har HaBayis Bisman Hazeh. There's become a recent wave of people going up to the Temple Mount to go there, to tour there, and so on, to even daven there. They're not allowed to, but they mumble under their breath inside the Har HaBayis. Now, strictly halachically speaking, the Har HaBayis today is larger than it was at the time of the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, there are places on the Har HaBayis today where we can identify where it wasn't the Har HaBayis at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, and where the Hazorah was versus where the Kodesh Kodashim was, even if you hold the Kodesh Kodashim is not on the Dome of the Rock. The Kodesh question is where the Kodesh Kodashim actually was. According to some opinions, it's where the Dome of the Rock was. According to the other, it's at the Dome of the Winds, which is a smaller structure somewhere else on the Temple Mount. But even taking that into account, there are areas which we could say were not a problem. Now, why is this? What's the issue? The issue is into the Har HaBayis, one is not allowed to enter if one is about Keri. One or Nida. One that had an emission which makes a person tummy. So therefore, a person to go into the Har HaBayis has to go into a mikvah. Besides that, into the Hazorah, you can't enter if you're a Tmei Meis. So therefore, in order to go to the Har HaBayis, you have to go to the mikvah. In order to go to the Hazorah, wherever the Hazorah was, which was the courtyard of the temple proper on the Temple Mount, you have to not be Tmei Meis. So therefore, sorry? Which we can't do. So therefore, they have to be able to determine A, where's Har HaBayis, they have to go make it first. B, where's Hazorah that you can't go at all. And again, they have ways of determining this, which are based on archaeology and based on measurements, but with the Chazish Amma, the Chaim Noah Amma, whatever it is. But the point is that they find areas where they can go, where a person can go, even though they're Tmei Meis, as long as they're not about Keri, and that's where they go. Those areas which are on the Har HaBayis, not part of the Hazorah. Why is this problematic from a halachic perspective? It's problematic from a halachic perspective because many people go over the line, and even if you don't go over the line, the policemen who have to protect you from the Arabs do go over the line. And you are causing, directly, policemen to have to go in places where they're not allowed to go, where they're chayav koris for going. First of all, on the Temple Mount itself, they're chayav tzalav because of the Bali Keri, they don't go on Nidos, they don't go to the mikvah first, and even in Hazorah is a chiyav misa, b'dei shamayim, nevertheless. So therefore, that's halachically why to be forbidden to go Har HaBayis, even if you know where to go. Besides that, there's a cherem made by the Rabbanim Yerushalayim and upheld by the chief rabbinate today that no Jew should enter Har HaBayis regardless of whether it's one of the permitted areas, not one of the areas. By cherem, I mean it's a takana. And when cherem normally think of as excommunication, it also means a takana. So it's takana that people should go to Har HaBayis. But the more important thing, based on what we're saying, is the question of motivation. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman was very anti-Zionist. And he was even very anti-religious Zionist. All the Rosh Yeshiva, from the great Rosh Yeshiva, when they came to America, they said, Shiur in our building. Right? The Shimon Shkop, I don't know if they're not there against America. But I'm saying he was an employee, but I'm saying before the war, people who came to visit, Rav Kook, the Rabbi Aaron Kotler, the Dvar Avav, Mordechai Epstein, from Hebron. All great Rosh Yeshiva came to YU instead of Shiur, except for Rabbi Wasserman. Rabbi Wasserman would not come to Yeshiva University to say Shiur because he held we are too tamei, because we have secular studies. They sent at the time to try and bring Rabbi Chanan to YU. Rabbi Chaim Zimmerman was one of the great Elohim of the early YU years, and Rabbi Chanan Wasserman sent back a message. He said he's still not coming, but he's very impressed with the Zimmerman boy. And Rabbi Chanan, before the Second World War, there's this famous letter in which Rabbi Chanan pleads with Balbatim in America to get them certificates to be able to save themselves, to come to America, and he says, but not to Yeshiva University or to Hebrew Theological College, Skokie Yeshiva, because that would be worse than wherever we're going to suffer, Ruchnius-wise, than wherever we're suffering here in Europe. Now, I don't think Rabbi Chanan knew the extent of what they were going to suffer. Had he known that, he probably would not have said what he said. But he was, he did say that, and Rabbi Chanan was known as a very, very zealous person, very grim and zealous person. There's almost no picture of him, almost never smiled. So Rabbi Chanan was a big Kanoi, and Rabbi Chanan was against Zionism and religious Zionism. And he said very off-putting way of putting, off-putting statements, which I don't like, but nevertheless has truth to it, which is that religious Zionism, in certain ways, is avodah zarah b'shituf. What does avodah zarah b'shituf mean? Shituf is, according to halacha, according to Ashkenazic halacha, non-Jews are allowed to worship avodah zarah as long as it's b'shituf, as long as one of the gods is the right one. But the Trinity is not avodah zarah because one of the three is the right one. For Goyim, not for us. For us it is avodah zarah, not for Goyim. So he said, religious Zionism is avodah zarah b'shituf. How so? Because it's based on religion and nationalism. Zionism in and of itself was a form of nationalism which, according to the platform of the Zionist party, had nothing to do with Judaism. It was just pure, simple nationalism based on the land of Israel. Just like nationalist Germany is based on Germany, nationalist America is based on the United States. Every country has a nationalism, so too our nationalism is based on Eretz Yisrael. So religious Zionism, he said, is a combination. It combines religion with nationalism. And he said that is avodah zarah b'shituf because you're serving two gods. Yeah.
Is it true that even though there's a minority, Shiva minority, him and a Cutler a little bit, they really influenced a lot of the Shiva world today?
After the Second World War, yes.
But in reality, that wasn't the real majority of Shivas.
Correct. That's correct. Okay.
But
Yes. That's the start. There was a much more moderate stance taken by Rebbe Meir Bloch and Rebbe Reuben Kozowski after the war, but that got lost. It's interesting that de facto, over the years, all yeshivas, most yeshivas are now Zionists. In the sense, not that they're truly Zionists, but if you ask anybody they should give back territory to the Arabs, they'd say no way, right? Because we have this kind of strange paradox. Jews are very good paradoxes, in which Jews they're officially against the state of Israel, but unofficially they're the most ardent, militant supporters of the state of Israel.
is there like sociological reason why the world turned all the way to the right in that regard?
Religious fervor is a big Yetzer Hara. Norman Lamb, president of Yiddish University, said once, he said that it's hard to be a passionate moderate. That's the problem, he said, with Torah Umada, because passionate moderation is an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. Yeah.
Well, Judaism, what's wrong with religious Zionism?
I'll give you
Religious nationalism.
I'll give you from Reb Chanan's perspective. If a person motivated people up in hard ice, many of them are not motivated by Avodas Hashem. They're motivated by the idea of asserting Israeli sovereignty over an area which is claimed by the Arabs as their holy place. That's a nationalist drive. In other words, just as if the United States would go and what? Take Texas, right? Or when they fought the wars with the British over Canada, right? Over the boundary. So that's nationalism. Nothing to do with religion. So, but that's my country, right or wrong, so to speak. That same thing is true about certain religious Zionists who go. I'm not opposed to religious Zionism. I oppose this phenomenon. The phenomenon of going up and on Har Bayis for nationalist purposes, not for purposes of Avodas Hashem. Now, I can't judge everybody, chas v'sholom, but many people do many things because they're nationalists. There's a group which ostensibly is meant to prevent intermarriage in the state of Israel called Lahava, and I fully believe that it really exists because they hate Arabs. It's not because they hate intermarriage. You can put something under a cloak of frumkeit, which is actually something which is nationalistic and racist or discriminatory in some way, shape, or form. Yeah.
So you're saying that religious nationalism is just a fancy way of saying mine, 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 mine.
The nationalism part of it, yes. The religion part is the, the religion part of it, no. The nationalism part of it, yes. So the now I want to make this clear that I was a card carrying member of Bnei Akiva when I was younger. I still can recite the Bnei Akiva anthem by heart today, and I don't fall into any specific category. I don't like categorizing myself. Rabbi Meir Shul wrote an article years ago in the 80s about how people tend to put other people in boxes, and how some people don't like being in boxes. And it's not fair that people put them in boxes. In other words, you fall into this category, you fall into the category. I don't like being categorized. There's a famous quote, which I believe is part of my underlying philosophy, which is, consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. In other words, if you're consistent, then there's something very wrong with you. It means it's something you're not thinking. If you don't have conflicting ideas within your mind, if you don't have, well, so much go this way, so much go that way, you're not thinking. You're buying somebody else's system. You have a little mind, not a big mind. A big mind should be full of paradoxes, full of contradictions, full of different opinions taken from various different places, and hopefully finding some way of reconciling them. But so therefore, I don't want to say there are every. I once heard there's a controversial figure whose name was Yitz Greenberg, who's started an organization called Cloud, which is kind of like to bring Reform, Conservative, Orthodox together with non-judgmentally, which we don't necessarily approve of in our circles. But in any event, he said, which is a good quote, he says, I don't care what denomination you're a part of, as long as you're not happy with it. So the same thing is true. That is a good way to live. Never be happy with whatever group you're with, because nobody's perfect. So therefore you have to constantly go back and forth, try to be independent as much as possible. So therefore there are flaws with religious Zionists and flaws with religious anti-Zionists. We shouldn't necessarily identify with one group over another unless we're pinned down and don't have a choice. But otherwise, it's always good to be in flux. But again, so this idea of going up to the Har HaBayis, it first started as a nationalist thing. The first people, Gershon Solomon, was the first leader of the Remanei Har HaBayit, was not even particularly frum. It was traditional, but it wasn't frum. But this is an idea of asserting Israeli sovereignty over an area which was in dispute. Israel does not raise its flag over the Har HaBayis. This irked them no end. So therefore, they started this movement in order to figuratively raise the Israeli flag over the Har HaBayis. Eventually, it became cloaked as in Avodas Hashem, but it's not Avodas Hashem.
The same thing happened with Abba. They didn't own it.
Sorry?
When they wanted to build the base of English, they bought it then. They didn't have it beforehand. By
Yeah, that's true. So I don't think anybody accomplishes more. I don't think anybody accomplishes more kavanah davening, a better davening in the Har HaBayis than they achieve at the Kosel. So I would say that if you really look for spirituality, the Kosel is the place to be. By the way, getting back to the 34, luckily, the cracks in the Kosel are now allowed to stick your hands into them, because the Har HaBayis starts, according to Moshe, at the outer surface. Let's go to the mikveh. The Har HaBayis starts at the outer surface of the wall. So therefore, to stick your hand into the wall is to stick your hand to the Har HaBayis. So therefore, unless you went to the mikveh beforehand, you should not stick your hand to the cracks. If you have a note, poke in it with a pen or something. Don't actually stick your hand in. Which leads us to another similar topic, which is once on topic of the Kosel and the Har HaBayis, which is the women of the wall. Women of the wall are women who go and hold prayer groups and prayer meetings at the Kosel, where they make women's Torah laning, women's prayer groups, where women put on tefillin, and so on and so forth. Now, why are we opposed to this? Again, because of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Because it's not being done in order to be Oved Hashem to a greater extent.
What if the woman wanted to be Oved Hashem to a greater extent? What should she do?
She daven with more kavanah. I'm sure you noticed that women.
That she doesn't need that to be considered.
Yeah, women do daven with more kavanah than men. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. When they
Yes.
daven.
So
When they daven.
the average Beis Yaakov girl davens is far more kavanah than the average yeshiva bacher. Right. Always go like this. Okay? I don't know why they use the siddur, because they just put the siddur like this many times. But one of the most heartbreaking videos I've ever seen is the one where they have a video of the girls davening in Gush Katif, which just before they evacuated everybody. And it was such a wrong thing for them to exploit these girls and have them daven, because their davening was heart-wrenching, so emotional, and afterwards the conclusion was foregone regardless. But so women daven much better than men, and therefore I don't see any reason why women need to have this fill-in or the same Torah, which anyway men don't do for particular.
Also davening is mitzvah nachayim.
Yes, but it's mitzvah nachayim, but it's a mitzvah with which they can express their desires to be spiritual, right? There's also plenty for women to learn without learning Gemara, right? Most, I'm sure most of you heard this from me, not necessarily everybody, but the boys, our educational system is is a horrendous failure for most boys.
4 years ago.
So just 4 years ago. So for the horrendous, and how have you experienced the last 4 years? You've been in high Shiur, so you haven't suffered as much. But the boy system, we kind of 4 years of high school, knowing maybe 10 or 20 blot of Gemara, and a dysfunctional knowledge of Hebrew, a dysfunctional knowledge of Tanakh, dysfunctional knowledge of several other subjects, whereas girls come out of high school and knowing significant amounts of Tanakh, knowing significant amounts of Hebrew, of Jewish thought, which boys don't get almost at all, of Musar, which boys get almost at all, and of other things which make them have a functional, good education, whereas boys come out ignorant in everything. So that's why we say teaching girls want to ruin their education. Why we ruin their education? We ruin the boys enough. What? Wait a minute, right? And girls have a problem finding a shidduchim a lot of times because they can't find boys who are up to their standards. So there are many ways in which women successfully do manifest kedusha, and there are ways in which to manifest kedusha, which have been generated over the years for both men and women. But outside that, it's questionable. In the case of the women of the wall, it's even more questionable because they offered the women a place next to the Kaisel somewhere else. So,
They said no.
and they said no. So if they were motivated by the ruchnius of being close to the Kaisel, then they were taking the other one, the other place. But they're obviously motivated, but not by that. Yes.
But what about like older seminaries, like learning Gemara? Is that still under the category of just teaching Gemara to the boys, or do you say that's their own thing, what they're doing of their own accord?
See, I'm not against women learning Gemara in and of itself, but it's pointless. So it's just going to be frustrating because for the boys, there's a lifelong structure. There's when they get back from Yeshiva, there's Yeshiva in America. There is Daf Yomi. There's all sorts of things which are structured for them for the rest of their lives, which have to do with learning Gemara. Whether Gemara should have been, so I don't know if Daf Yomi was the greatest idea of all times. I don't know if perhaps we would have better with a what? Halacha Yomi, or that's right, or Chumash Yomi, whatever, Nach Yomi, Musar Yomi, but that's the way it developed. That was the Daf Yomi. So there's a lifelong structure for boys in the Gemara. But for girls in the Gemara, there's no such structure. So you're giving them something which is not going to be basis for anything later on. It's counterproductive. It's not something which is actually going to make them better people than maybe other subjects. It's something which gives them academic outlet, but academic outlet which is going to fall away. So it's better for them to not to learn Gemara, again, because sociologically our society is not built that way. Will it be someday differently? I don't think so, but maybe it will. But in the meantime, it's not. There's certain forms which also are I think are made to appeal to women. Once a week I learn with conservative rabbis, four rabbis and 2 rabbiettes. So I went out of trouble because it's very. I think I make a big kiddush Hashem when I do it. So that's why I do it. Actually, to be mekadosh Hashem, there's no money or compensation of any sort. Although once I was taking a scholar residence, I made $1,000, but that wasn't why I did it. That was just a one-time thing. But in any event, there's certain forms which appeal to women. One of them is Nesiva Sholem, the summer. I don't enjoy the slaughter, but it's too touchy-feely for me. So I mentioned once that when we went to Nesiva Sholem, this group for a while, and I said once before I learned that I was so excited because I hemmed it hard a bit and then said it's too Ibish, which means it's too feminine. And they got upset. The women in the group got for a short amount of time somewhat upset at me, but we overcame it. And it became a joke. But the thing is that there are certain svarim which are very popular for women, by which women learn. I think Rabbi Pinchas' svarim are another example of that. which also men learn to. Of course, men also learn this one, but they have certain appeal to women, and that is what women should focus on. And men also, again, the fact that we are animals can be attributed to, and we continue to remain animals, attributed to large parts of the fact that we don't find svarim other than the Gemara which are appropriate for ourselves to become greater Oiv Hashem, something which is a great shortcoming of our system, which if we could rectify, we would rectify, and we can't, which is a great tragedy. Any questions for today? Covered a lot of topics.
Okay.
Yes.
What you said about that you could listen to this whole Isha emotions, like I said, you have the time, or you don't?
No, you don't know what she looks like. When it says "Eni Sholi Elo Masha in Vros," which we interpret to mean that which you know what it looked like, not what you're saying at the moment. Yeah, it's a bummer. But if you don't remember what the picture looks like, it'll be okay. You'd have to have it etched in your mind. Yeah.
One help forgetting it.
Like having someone on the shoulder is not falling under the category of derech and derechila, but is that still you have to do that?
Right. It's I think it is derech. You know, the co-ed schools sometimes they say they give each other high fives and they say it's not derech. Nonsense. Right. So we're very good at trying to trick ourselves. That's one of the great human traits. So I believe that it's possible that's not derech, but it's more probable that any type of interaction is going to be. Right.
And question is, when women have to dress neatly, is that just for men?
No, for themselves. Men have to dress neatly too. By my standards, no. By your standards, yes. By my standards when I was your age, probably yes.
What do you mean?
It's going to change. When you become a rabbi someday, so you won't be able to dress like this. When I became a rabbi, I started wearing a jacket in public wherever I go when I got Negi'ah. So for different people, the different levels of tznius, right? Short sleeves, I would not wear short sleeves nowadays, even when I don't wear a jacket. But everybody has different levels. But men also have levels of tznius. What?
How does it help me to be tznius?
It makes you more dignified and more respectful. In other words, where a person is, how they dress. Most of our commercial society, most advertising is based on that. In other words, wearing a shirt with a logo shouldn't make you any different than wearing a shirt without a logo, right? But yet, people pay more for shirts that are a postal on them, right? So why is that? So I think because there's this crazy thing about human nature, which is everything I wear, everything I do says something about me. So therefore, the way I dress indicates something about me. It used to be an MTI. Used to be not so much nowadays because dress code is lax. But it used to be much. You could see how serious MTI kid was by whether he had his shirt tucked in, whether he was wearing slacks as opposed with a crease, as opposed to with dungarees, whether he was wearing shoes as opposed to sneakers. So there are all sorts of subtle signals which MTA kids used to give out in order to demonstrate how serious they were. But nowadays it's not the same thing. But tznius is for everybody. Tznius is for everybody at all times. It's just that they're different levels depending on who they are, which make them dignified and respectful people. You'll see Rabbi Mendelson walking around without a jacket, but not with his sleeves rolled up. Yeah. We're talking about tznius. Moshe used to wear short sleeve shirts. What? Oh, these guys are? Yeah. So they wear long sleeves. Okay? You have it.
But tznius also matters on like who you are. You're saying like
Yeah.
a Rosh Yeshiva should be dressing more tznius than a there's no
Right.
basis for Yeshiva just how they come with the Yeshiva.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
What should the person be doing in yeshiva?
Sorry?
What should a person be?
Probably depends which yeshiva.
Every yeshiva is different. If you guys came dressed the way you're dressed into a right-wing yeshiva, they think you're yeah. Good work.
Just like Camp
But-
Monroe, you can't dress like this, but if you go to right-wing yeshiva, it's not.
It's not okay dressed like an MTA either. I'm against
No, in Camp Monroe.
the camera. It's fine.
Let's say a girl would want to go to, a girl is not from, right? And it's going to a place where nobody's tznius. So if they consider not tznius to dress,
That's because everything.
obviously.
Yes, there's certain objective standards by girls which don't apply to boys. But even the objective standard by boys were very often too lax subjectively. Right? The two different things for girls there's objective and there's subjective. But you're right. If they were placed with only girls, they could dress that way. But subjectively, it's still wrong. Right? Even though objectively it doesn't apply, subjectively it does. Okay. So I'm against somebody came over to me the other day and said they're starting movement to get MTA to allow polo shirts. So they said, Albert said, if they get all the Rebbe's permission to do it, they'll do it. So I said, I won't stand up for my no, it's a sophomore. I won't stand up for my position, but I'm opposed to it because I think the MTA started going down the tubes. MTA started going down the tubes in 1963, right? 1963 when they stopped requiring students to wear ties to class. That was the beginning of the end. So since then it's gone downhill.
Yeah, but at least the end has been going on for 50 years.
Yeah, it's a slow death. Seriously speaking, if you go to a prep school, in prep schools they require kids to come in jackets and ties to class. There's a reason for it. Any other questions? We have 5 minutes to lunch. If anybody wants any last questions?
Oh, you said you were going to come back on how to reconcile this idea that I toured really hard, but how we're supposed to love Torah.
Oh, so there's a difference between from the outside and from the inside. In other words, yes, from the out, Ma'amatan Torah saying Shavuos is when we receive the Torah. When you receive the Torah, it is distasteful. That's why we always start Mitoch Shelo Lishma Bo Lishma, because when you start yeshiva, it's a pain, it's a hassle to have to learn Torah. But once you get into it, Kim Chayenu Baruch Yameinu, then it's sweet beyond anything else, then it's exhilarating beyond anything else. And that's the difference between Shavuos and Simchat Torah. Shavuos, it's a chok to be happy, because that's when we got the Torah. Simchat Torah, we've already experienced the Torah. So that's why we rejoice on our own with great simcha. Simchat Torah's simcha is greater than Shavuos because it's from the inside as opposed to the outside. And most things are like that. A person, at the beginning, they're hard. Eventually, if you stick with it and you enjoy it, they become thrilling and exhilarating.
So,
that's the answer.
How do you convince somebody who's scared to become religious because they're scared that they'll lose all their own they'll be horrible, like miserable? How do you convince them?
You can't.
You can't.
If they're that magusham, it's not. You can't convince them. You can try, but it won't work. They have to have some idealism. Yes, but that's not your what? No, you can't say trust. That's why the Baalei Tshuva movement has become much smaller than it used to be. Because you have to have a sense of, back in the 60s and still 70s and even a little bit in the 80s, there's a strong sense of idealism. Idealism in the general society was misdirected, but there was a sense of idealism. Somebody who latched on that sense of idealism would find Torah idealism to be attractive. Nowadays, everybody is hedonist, so it's very hard to get people to know Baalei Tshuva. Yeah. Yes, but he's talking about if you have a guy. Well,
no, I'm saying just like we were saying that you don't find Torah enjoyable, but it's just that aren't there parts people do find enjoyable?
yes, but only once to get into it. It's not.
Let's say you told someone like about Shabbos, like every week, like they have to rest.
They think it's crazy. Most people think Shabbos is horrible until they experience it.
No, I think most people think Shabbos is horrible until they were dumb.
Okay.
Is that really a good svara you want to get Baalei Tshuva? Oh, if you really think a shmak rest, then therefore you should be Jewish. No, that's not. That's a way to become Jewish. Because it's a shmak rest.
I think it's criminal to become Jewish, right? But
that's number one way. The Shabbat project. You will not experience the Shabbat. It's amazing. Like, no, when I said, do that.
yeah, it's a. Sometimes we live in a PR oriented society, so sometimes we use the tools of modern society to achieve our goals. Is that it's like Chabad with menorahs. Yeah, so you need to have PR. Sometimes PR helps, but you're right. It's only a tool. It's not really what the real thing is. And it is a problem that we have to use in today's society. Yeah.
So high fives or tapping somebody or whatever, it doesn't lead to physical relationship.
It is a physical relationship in and of itself.
Why
It's
is
pleasurable
that?
in and of itself.
Is that
Could be Doraisa. Could be.
The Shulchan Aruch Hakim is that right?
I think Derech wasn't Doraisa, yeah. It is Machlokes Rishonim. I think we passed Doraisa. Yeah. Everybody say thank you very much for coming and listening. L'shana Haba B'Yerushalayim.
Thank you very much.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Get it?